So now that you have a little bit of a better understanding maybe of just who Isaac was and how important Isaac was, then maybe you'll understand this test that God's about to put Abraham through just a little bit better, to understand the magnitude and confusing nature of this test. So Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 2 says this: "Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, 'Abraham.' 'Here I am,' he replied. Then God said, 'Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you.'" Whoa. Wait a second. We just walked through how important Isaac is. How God promised Abraham that Isaac was going to be the one that he was going to carry on his promise, his blessing, his covenant with, is through his son Isaac. Now God is saying, "Abraham, I want you to take your son, go over to the mountain of Moriah and sacrifice him there." Well, let's address human sacrifice for a second here. Because to us, that's appalling, as it should be. But to Abraham's time, it might have been appalling, but it wasn't unheard of. Okay? Human sacrifice was very common for pagan worshipers of that day. So it was going on. Now, God had never asked that of his people, but Abraham would have known, it would have, I don't want to say he would have seen it, but it happened very often in that day and age to pagan gods. People would worship their pagan gods and offer human sacrifices. But again, God had never asked that of his people. God was asking Abraham to kill the very promise that he gave him. This promise wasn't through a prophet. This promise wasn't through his father, through a friend, through a neighbor, hey, God's going to do this. And Abraham would be like, well, okay, he must have just gotten it wrong. No, this promise came from God. And now it appears that God just wants to break the promise. No, now, Abraham, I want you to sacrifice your son, Isaac. And Abraham had to make a decision. Was Abraham going to trust the promise, or was he going to trust the promiser? It's two different things. Was he going to trust the promise that God had given him? Now remember, it came from God, but it was this promise that Isaac was the son. He was the chosen one, that all his descendants, that all the blessing, everything that God had given was going to come through Isaac. Was he going to trust in the promise, or was he going to trust in the one who gave the promise and trust God?